Today we're going to make rosemary sourdough rolls. They have a nice chewy inside with hints of rosemary and like a nice crunchy outside. They're perfect for dinner or a special occasion or Thanksgiving, really anything. So let's get started. So rosemary bread. The first thing we need to talk about is the sourdough starter. So this recipe calls for 125% hydration levain, which just means that for every 100 grams of flour, there's 125 grams of water. My standard levain that I keep is a 1-to-1 ratio, so 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. No particular reason, it just is, right? So I'm gonna link up there to all of my tutorials on how to create 125% levain from your standard starter, and also all of my tips for maintenance of your starter or creating a starter of your own so that you can make this amazing bread. So anyways, I'm gonna put her aside. This is a super easy recipe, okay? So all we're gonna do is basically combine most of our ingredients. So I've got bread flour. I wanted a little bit more chew, a little bit more gluten to this bread, so I've used bread flour here. If you don't have it, then you can absolutely use AP flour, no stress. I've got my salt. This is kosher salt, very important. I have my, this is my starter. So I'm just gonna pour it in, scoop it out. I just like to use my fingers. You can use a spatula or something like that. And then I've got a little bit of milk. This is not a super enriched dough. It's a fairly unenriched, meaning there's not a lot of additives like butter or, you know, oil and stuff like that, but there's a little bit, so there's a little bit of milk. And then my water. This is regular, good old New York City tap water. Nothing fancy about it. So I'm going to mix this up with the paddle attachment just because I find it a little bit more efficient than the dough hook. But as soon as it comes together and the flour is hydrated, then I am going to switch to my dough hook. So just start it on low. We're really just trying to incorporate the ingredients here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and switch. Attach your hook, your dough hook, and then just turn it up to kind of medium. And then we're going to develop the gluten. So you can see it's come together. I'm just going to pull it out to show you. This is a fairly low hydration dough. It's only 56% water, so not including the levain. So it's not a super wet or sticky dough, kind of like my other standard dough. So you can see that it's come together in a ball. It's a bit sticky because it's, it hasn't fully developed yet. But you can see it's like really rough. So it's going to go back in there. We're going to keep mixing it to keep developing that gluten. Smell the sourdough so bad. So my mixer actually started crying out in pain about 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago. So I let it sit. I let it do an autolyse. So I basically just I covered it with plastic wrap and just let it sit there for 10 minutes, which will develop gluten without mixing. Every so often you want to stop the mixer, you want to try and pull a window pane, just grab a hunk of dough and try and pull a window pane. So you can see that I'm almost able to pull a window, but it's, it's not smooth, it's not even pretending to be smooth, but there's structure there and I'm able to get it thinner, but not quite as thin as we want. So we're just gonna keep mixing it. So my dough has been mixing. I can pull a window with it. I don't want this to be like super duper thin and smooth and silky, almost like a brioche. I don't need that much structure. I'm gonna get a little bit more structure from my folding. As long as you can pull a window and there's some gluten strands, but it's not like breaking on you, then it's good. So I'm gonna turn on low and I'm gonna add my olive oil. You want to add it like a little bit at a time because otherwise your olive oil is just going to fly everywhere. The reason we're adding this now is because if you add it all at the beginning, then it's just going to take even longer for your dough to mix. All right, so we'll add the rest of our oil. I'm also going to add my rosemary. It's going to help the oil get in there actually faster, believe it or not. So this is fresh rosemary. In it goes. And then you just want to have patience. So it takes a little bit for this amount of oil or butter or anything to get into the dough and to work into it. And so you want to make sure that you allow it the time it needs to do that. And if it's really being a pain in the tush, you can take your hook and kind of just flip it on itself. You can flip it over and just kind of, move the dough around a little bit, break it up. Alright, so you can see that my oil has completely worked into itself, into the dough. If it still looks oily, then it needs to mix a little bit longer. So all we're going to do is we're going to turn this into an oiled bowl. I've got a little bit of olive oil here that I've just gotten dough all over. Perfect. If I've got olive oil in a bread, then I'll use olive oil to oil my bowl. Otherwise, I use Pam spray or canola oil. I'm just going to grab my little bowl scraper here, and I'm going to grab my dough, and without any sort of flourish, I'm going to plop it in. It doesn't matter what your bowl looks, your dough looks like in your bowl. It doesn't have to be a pretty little, round or boule or anything. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this, and I'm going to let it bulk proof for about an hour and a half until it's roughly doubled. But halfway in between that, so in 45 minutes, we are going to give it a nice fold. And all that's going to do is redistribute the yeast to their food, redistribute the temperature so that no part of it is proofing too fast, and then we'll have a happy dough. So it's been 45 minutes, and we are ready to fold our proofing dough. So I'm just going to take some of the oil that's like on the side and oil my hands. You can also use bench flour if you'd like. I'm just going to loosen it from the sides. Just going to make my job easier. And then we're going to fold. We're going to stretch and fold. So give it a stretch and flop it down. Turn it around and do the same thing this way. See how nice and silky this dough is? This is good news. Turn it around and then do the final side. You don't have to flip it, but I flipped it so you could see just how nice and smooth and shiny and beautiful she is. Okay, so she's beautiful, but she is not proofed. So we are going to cover her back up. I'm going to place her back in the sunshine, then let her proof another 45 minutes. There is no artificial yeast in this recipe, so we're really waiting on the sourdough starter to really get going. And once it does, then it's going to be excited and it's going to be ready before we know it. But we just want to make sure we keep an eye on her. So our dough has risen, and we are going to divide our dough now. Grab a little bit of bench flour, flour your bench. Nothing excessive, just enough, and then flour. We're going to go ahead and flour the top of our dough as well, and then we're going to turn it out using your bowl scraper to get it all out. All right, and then go ahead and flour the top of your dough. All right, and now we're going to divide. So for rolls, you could actually shape this and bake it in a bowl, but we are going to make these into rolls. So I'm going to divide into 75-gram portions. The way I like to do that is just go ahead and kind of like make a little line here, and then just, the rosemary is making it difficult. I should have chopped it. I'm just going to go ahead and weigh each piece. As long as it's around 75 grams, then it's perfect. And now we're going to pre-shape. So both the final and the pre-shape are going to be into a bowl, so just like a round. And so all we're going to do is take a piece, fold it in underneath itself, and then shape it like that. So all I'm doing is kind of pulling and tightening as I turn the dough, and so it's pulling it underneath itself. You see? We're going to shape them again, so there's really no need to make it perfect. This time around, the pre-shape just kind of gets it used to its shape. It'll make sure that the final shape is tight and will hold its shape when you bake it and final proof it. Now I didn't add any more bench flour to my surface. This dough is beautiful, and it's not that sticky because it's only 56% hydration. So you don't have to stress about it. Like, if it starts to stick a little bit to your hands, then flour your hands. Now I like to make a little extra rolls, and that way you can basically bake them and freeze them. And then they'll keep for like up to 2 months in the freezer. And then you just kind of refresh them in the oven and they'll be nice, almost basically as if you had just done it. So anyway, we've pre-shaped our rolls and we're gonna let them basically just hang out right here for about 10 minutes. They're gonna relax a little bit, the gluten's gonna relax, and then we're gonna shape them again, and then we'll do our final proof. Okay, so it has been 10 minutes and they are done resting, and they are ready to be final shaped and placed on their sheet pans or whatever. You can bake them in tins if you'd like, or cluster them all together, or you can bake them on sheet pans. Whatever you feel like doing, whatever you have on hand is best. Just give them a little light, very light dusting on their tops, and then we are going to shape. Stretch them a little bit, fold them over on themselves, and then you do the same thing that you did before, kind of rolling them into themselves until they're nice and kind of like tucked under and high and proud, and then we'll place them on our baking sheet. So now I'm just gonna cover them with plastic wrap again to let them final proof. I'll check them in about 45 minutes and then we'll go from there. Meanwhile, I am also preheating my oven to 400 degrees convection, just so it's ready when we're ready. Okay, so our rolls are ready to bake. So I'm just gonna take off the plastic wrap. If you don't put the plastic wrap on there, they'll just kind of dry out on top and you might get a skin that you don't want. They might have a hard time rising because it's already almost created a crust already. And so, you might not get as nice and as fluffy a roll. So you can just bake them like this. I'm gonna score them with scissors. It's probably one of the easiest ways to quickly score a lot of rolls. We're gonna snip like this. Doop. Boop. This will help it rise in the center and kind of create a nice top. You could score with a razor blade if you want. You can do whatever you want. But do you see how fast that was? Exactly. So I'm gonna go ahead and bake these in my preheated oven. It's 400 degrees convection. I'm gonna pop them in and then I'm gonna check them in about 8 minutes and see what they're doing. They're out of the oven. They baked for about, I actually ended up turning it up to 425 just to get that nice golden brown on the outside. They weren't browning at 400, so. And they are nice and golden brown. They smell like rosemary, but we are going to have patience and we're gonna let them cool before we bust into them, even though we want to right now. Finally, the moment is here. It is time to try them. They've cooled-ish, let's begin. They haven't cooled very much at all, but I can handle them, so it's basically good enough to eat. But they have a nice crisp outside. You can hear that crackle? Maybe not, but anyways, there's a nice crackle. There's some blistering on the outside, and then you break into them. Oh yes, and there's some nice big air bubbles, but it's nice and soft in there, and just it's still a little warm. It's chewy, like the perfect amount of rosemary. It's phenomenal.